So if you've been recommended this video, then chances are you're like me and are an avid watcher of people like Ali Abdaal, Michelle B, Matt Diavella, and other gurus who inhabit the productivity and self-improvement space. And if you've been following this type of content for a while, then you may have noticed a bit of a shift in the discourse of what productivity means and sort of questions like, what is the whole point of being productive? Is this something we should be striving towards? Or is it doing us more harm than good? So in this video, I wanted to offer a bit of an alternative take as to why I think striving to be productive is not always all that bad, with some caveats, of course. I'll start off by giving some context about the productivity trend and how it's changed over the last couple of years before unpacking my take on all of this. I'll put timestamps down below if you want to skip the history lesson and jump straight to my take on this. Productivity and hustle culture. So productivity content isn't anything new. It has been around for quite some time in various forms. Earlier forms would be, of course, your cheesy self-help books like Think and Grow Rich or The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And you've got your motivational speakers like Tony Robbins and alike. And then as YouTube started changing with increasing diversity of its content, along with other platforms like Instagram and Tumblr, productivity content started appearing on these platforms. And I think the accessibility of these platforms in terms of creating and consuming content has contributed to spreading productivity content across a larger and more diverse audience, and has helped create sub-niches within this space that target different motivations for why people want to be productive. And for example, you've got content targeting people wanting to be entrepreneurs or small business owners, and content specifically for salesmen or students. I personally got onto the StudyTube and StudyGram train as this type of content helped me get motivated to study and even inspired me to start my own channel. But I think regardless of what sub-niche you subscribe to, the underlying messages and advice about productivity is very similar, if not the same across these genres. It's just packaged differently for different people. Productivity and the pandemic. In recent years, I think there's been a massive pushback to hustle culture and a greater focus instead on taking care of yourself and prioritizing your mental and physical health. And there's been a lot of questions as to why we work and who benefits from our work. And this idea that working harder doesn't necessarily bring you any greater benefits than if you were to just work normally. Instead, it is the companies and the capitalist system as a whole who benefit from pushing this productivity and hustle culture mindset onto its workers. And there's also been some criticism against promoting certain lists of habits as the end-all and be-all to being successful and productive, as this content is a little bit unrealistic in its expectations, and it can be discouraging if you can't keep up or some of these habits don't work as well for you. Now, some of these ideas and criticisms aren't necessarily new, but I think they've gained a lot more traction in the past 3 or so years. And particularly, we've seen the anti-work and the I Don't Dream of Labour movement and Great Resignation gain traction to the point that it's being mentioned in mainstream media. And personally, I think due to this, productivity has been given a bit of a bad rap. And there's been quite a few videos floating around lately where the creator denounces that they've got productivity all wrong and that there should be a better way forward in the opposite direction. And don't get me wrong, this trend away from productivity has been great in recognizing that people operate differently and that a lot of the advice being given doesn't suit everyone equally, and that it's perfectly okay to stay away from productivity and instead strive to do what makes you happy. And this is where I'll segue into my take on productivity, which I think can be taken as being quite sympathetic to it, but I do want to stress the importance of defining it properly. So my definition of productivity is about getting the things that you don't want to do but have to do done, so that you have more time to do the things that you want to do and the things that actually bring you joy and value to your life. And so there's two parts to this. Firstly, it is about developing habits and/or strategies to get over procrastination to do the things that you don't want to do. And then secondly, it is about developing habits and/or strategies to do these things in the most efficient way possible so that you free up time to do the things that you want. This definition of productivity is purposely vague to acknowledge that people have different goals and values and ways of operating. And this definition doesn't inherently tie productivity with doing more things at work or having a side hustle or trying to get at being financially free. To acknowledge that some people might not want these things. And instead, it's focused on how I can free up my time to do the things that I want to do in my daily life. It doesn't give into the idea that you have to hustle all the time and ignore your immediate needs so that you can be successful in some distant future. And by redefining productivity in this way, I can follow the advice or tips on productivity that fit into this vision. And it circumvents some of the critiques about productivity being a mechanism of capitalism at the expense of a healthy work-life balance. I guess to give a more concrete example to illustrate my point, when I first started working at my full-time job, I felt like I only had time to cook, clean, do a bit of admin, and eat. And I was pretty discouraged because I felt like I barely had any time for my hobbies or seeing friends and doing fun stuff that I want to do. But by being productive, I'm able to structure my time in a more efficient way and fit all of these things in. And finding healthy habits that actually work for me and developing them has been so important for my mental and physical health. And in a similar way, when I go back to studying, the goal of being productive isn't to see how long I can study for or to make studying my life or do more than what I have to do, but to ensure that I get what I need to get done in a shorter time so that I can enjoy a decent chunk of my day without worrying about studies. And then also I'd like to avoid spending the entire day studying when in actual fact I've been doom scrolling on social media and wishing that I had more free time instead of studying. So instead of writing off productivity as being toxic, I don't see it as being at ends with a healthy work-life balance or self-care. And instead, I think it can be quite compatible with these ends in mind if it's redefined in a more sympathetic and personalized way.